Well, good afternoon. How's everybody doing today? That's good. That's good. I'll give you a forewarning. I've had this like cough going on, so if I start coughing, it's okay. I'm not dying yet. Hey, as I came this morning or today or whatever it is time it is, I realized two things. I realized first of all, you're lucky. Besides weddings, this is the first time I've tucked in a shirt all year. Okay. So first of all, you're lucky I'm here in a tucked in shirt. Okay. So there's that. The second thing I realized is there's a bunch of people, or there's several people, excuse me, Rob, that are really good friends that they've all said, hey, how many times are you going to mess up while you're up there? Okay. So second thing I realized is there's a lot of people that want to see me mess up while I'm up here. So it happens. Hey, just go with it. So this semester, you've been going through your theme verse is Jeremiah 29:11. It says this, "For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord, plans for welfare, not for evil, to give you a future and a hope." Now, I'm not going to dwell too much on this verse because I know that you've had a lot of other people come and speak, and they do it just as a lot better job at it than me, right? And I'm in case you don't know me, I'm a very simple-minded person. I'm not very smart. I'm just very simple, basic, right? And so when I start looking at verses, I start looking at, okay, let's get real. Let's see what actually the first thing that hits when I see that. And the first thing that hits is when I see that is kind of a couple different ways we look at this verse. The first way is like this, okay? I did a Google search on this verse, Jeremiah 29:11, and I knew it was going to come up, and because I clicked on photos, right? And when you click on photos, it's like this nice background with beautiful flowers or whatever, and it has this verse written in a good scripted verse, right? And it's a good verse, it is, right? But then I started thinking more about it. And there's two ways we can look at this verse. There's the first way that we look at it when things are going good and we're like, hey, yeah, that's awesome. God has a plan for me and everything's working out. Like he's got a hope, he's got a future, man. Life is good, right? But then there's the other way we look at this verse. There's the other way we look at this verse. When we're going through tough times, we look at it a little differently. Because then we start questioning God, be like, God, I thought you had plans for me. I thought you had welfare and not evil. I thought you had a future and a hope for me. God, I don't see it. I don't understand. Why did you say this, right? We go through tough times. This friend may send us this verse. We may read it, and they may say this. They may say, hey, Ryan, I know things are going rough right now, but you just got to have faith, right? Because we all love hearing that. It's true, and it's a good thing, but in those times, we don't necessarily love hearing that. I remember when I saw both sides of this verse, right? Things were going good. I knew where I was at. It was time for me to move to a different location, a different job and everything. And hey, when I read this verse, I was like, hey, this is great, God. You have a plan for me. You got a hope for me. Like I see it. I see where I'm going. I see what's going on. God, you are good. Things are great. It was good, right? Less than a year later, it all went downhill. It all went downhill very quickly. And all of a sudden, I started asking, like, whoa, God, hold on. You have plans for me. You got a hope. You got a future for me. Where is that at? Where are you at, God? And he says, well, Ryan, you just got to have faith. Right? That's what God tells me. And not vocally, but like in my heart, I'm like, okay, you got to have faith. So, okay, God, I do what every Christian does, every good Christian. I'll say, okay, God, I'm going to have faith. Well, soon after that, I lost my income. I was still working a job with no income. In fact, I was spending a lot of money from my credit. I say I don't have money, but it's on my credit cards on this job. And I was like, God, like I said I was going to have faith, but yet you went even further downhill. Like I don't know where you're at. I don't know what's going on. And God's like, you just got to have faith. And every time I thought that I found a solution to the problem, it all went downhill. And I began to wonder, like God, where are you at? On Sunday mornings, I almost did not want to go to church on Sunday mornings. It got that low. When I went to sleep at night, I would get into bed, but I wouldn't really want to go to sleep because I knew if I went to sleep, I'd have to wake up the next morning and I would have to face all these problems all over again. I'm like, God, where are you at? And he's like, hey, you just got to have faith. You just got to have faith, right? And so I remember one day I kind of spent some time in prayer, spent a lot of alone time with God, many hours of alone time with God. And finally I decided, hey, God, I'm truly going to have faith in you. I'm going to do whatever it is that you want me to do. Like I know life is not good right now, but I know that you have plans for me. You have a future for me. You have hope for me. So God, whatever you want me to do, the answer is yes. The answer is yes. Whatever it is. And I truly surrendered that time to God, and I was like, it's all yours. That same week, I was about to have some tough conversations, but it was okay because everything was going to be the way God wanted it to. And that same week, I got a call from 2 different people about jobs. These people didn't know I was looking for a job. I haven't even told anybody I was looking for a job. Me and my wife was the only one that knew I was about to look for a new job. And one of those jobs led me to where I'm at now, and I love where I'm at now. And I can't help but think, like I never heard an audible voice from God, but I can't help but think after that God would say, now, was that so hard? I told you just to have faith. Why didn't you just trust me? Why didn't you just have faith? Have you ever been in this situation? Tonight, I want to talk a little bit about this idea of having faith, the courage to have faith. Hey, if we're honest, it's hard to have faith. It's hard to have faith a lot of times. A friend asks you, hey, do you trust me? Do you have faith in me? I know there's several people in this room that if they ask me, hey, Ryan, do you trust me? Do you have faith in me? My answer will be a good, strong no. Because I know they don't have my best interest at heart, right? But faith is hard because we want to know what's coming. I remember me and Margaret, we were in the Philippines, and we were hiking this trail full of waterfalls, and we had a guide with us that he was taking us through. And some of these waterfalls you can jump off in, right? You can jump in the water. Now I'm scared of heights, okay? Anybody else scared of heights? Is it just me? Okay, a couple people. Okay, some of y'all are lying. But okay, yeah, I'm scared of heights. I'm terrified of heights. But sometimes I get a little adventurous. And so we get to these waterfalls, and they're like, hey, you can jump off this waterfall into the water. I'm adventurous, but I want to see it happen first. Because see, here's the thing. Things are different. If you've never been to another country, things are a little different. Here, if we say, hey, jump off in the waterfall, we say, well, here's your life jacket. There's a lifeguard down below. There's rails down below. Like, there's all these safety things. And then if I fall and I break my leg, I'm suing you, right? In another country, they say, go ahead. And if you fall, you break a leg, you're like, whoops, well, that sucks, but nothing happens, right? And so I want to see it happen first. Now, once I saw someone jump in, then it was okay. Then I could jump in. Because, see, that's the way we treat faith. We don't really have faith a lot of times because we want to know what's going to happen next. We want to know exactly what the results are going to be. Our faith in God is often that way. We're supposed to have faith in God, but we don't have the faith to be proactive about it. Why? Because we don't know what's going to happen next. So just for a few moments, I want to look at this idea of the courage of having faith. And for this, we're going to look in Hebrews chapter 11. When it comes to faith, J.B. Phillips said this: if we have a tiny God, we should not trust him. Only the true God, the greatest sovereign, loving, faithful, omniscient, omnipotent, and holy God of the Scripture deserves trust. When we start to know God, when we start to draw closer to God, our faith and our trust grows. Faith is proved when we face trials, when we face disasters, persecution, ridicule. When we face those things, we have faith, we stand strong. Faith is a source of courage. We do not have great faith because of our courage. We have great courage because of our faith. Courage demonstrates faith. So here's the 2 things. I want to go ahead and tell you exactly what I want you to get from this message today, and then we'll kind of get into it. And it's these 2 things. Sometimes faith doesn't make sense. Sometimes faith doesn't make sense. And the second thing is that God doesn't care about your past. God doesn't care about your past. He just wants you to have faith in him. So let's look at kind of a couple of different places in Scripture when we talk about faith. We could look at Hebrews chapter 11, and there's tons of people that had great faith, but there was 2, like I said, these 2 kind of stood out in particular to me when we start talking about Jeremiah 29:11. And so we're going to look at verse 30 first. Verse 30 says this: by faith the walls of Jericho fell down after they had been encircled for 7 days. Hey, this is a very interesting story. So if you don't know this story, basically Moses goes against the Israelites and rescues them from Egypt, and they start going, and as they're going, they start looking back, and they see the Egyptian army coming. They get to the Red Sea, and they're like, oh no, what are we going to do, right? And Jesus and God parts the Red Sea, and they walk through on dry land, right? And what we see is this was kind of one of the last things that of great faith that the Israelites had done until we get to our story tonight. And then after that, what we see is that the Israelites wandered around for 40 years. They wandered around for 40 years. Now, where they were going would literally only take 40 weeks, but they had been walking around for 40 years. Why? Ultimately, it was because their lack of faith. They were constantly complaining. God would provide, they would complain. God would provide, they would complain. They were never content. They continually questioned God. And as a result, God judged them for their sin. And God said, we won't get into a promised land until the older generation dies out. Okay? So, when we look at kind of where we're at now, 40 years later, the older generation had kind of died out. And we see where great faith happened again. See, the Israelites would settle in the land of Canaan, but they would have to go through some obstacles along the way. The first obstacle they would have to go through was Jericho. Jericho seemed like an impossible obstacle to overcome. Jericho was located in a very strategically, it was had very big walls, very high, thick walls, and it had soldiers that were very well trained. And then you had the Israelites, okay? These were the people that had been walking around for 40 years, probably didn't really have much of a fighting sense about them, probably didn't even have any weapons. And so they were supposed to conquer Jericho. Now, let's go back 40 years, okay? Let's go back 40 years. What we see is that the Israelites, the older generation, had actually went to Jericho. They actually went to Jericho because God was going to tell them to take over the land of Jericho, which they didn't because of their lack of faith. But they sent some spies in. And here's what the spies said about the land of Jericho. It says, the people are greater and taller than we. The cities are great and fortified up to heaven. And besides, we have seen the sons of Anakim there. Now, the description of Jericho here that we see here is a little exaggerated, but it's not a false description. And what we see is the Israelites did not conquer Jericho because of their lack of faith. Not because they wouldn't win, but because of their unbelief. So we go back to our story for today. They're there. They know how terrifying the city of Jericho is. And later we would see that God would use them to conquer armies through, or to conquer lands through their army, through fighting. But what we see is that's not what he does here. All he wants here is a few symbolic acts of faith. Because if you don't know the story, here's what he tells them to do. He says, you shall march around the city of the men of war, going around the city once. Thus shall you do for 6 days. 7 priests shall bear 7 trumpets of ram's horns after the ark. On the 7th day, you shall march around the city 7 times, and the priests shall blow the trumpets. And when they make a long blast with the ram's horns, when you hear the sound of the trumpet, then all the people shall shout with a great shout, and the wall of the city will fall down flat, and the people shall go up, every one straight before him. Now, let's think about that for a second. He says, you're going to conquer this land, but here's how you're going to do it. You're going to walk around the city a total of 13 times, and then you're going to yell, ta-da, you got the land, right? Like that doesn't make sense, right? I've been to a place called Xi'an in China. For you history people, Xi'an is known for what? Okay, so I'll tell you. I think somebody said it back there. They're known for the terracotta soldiers, okay? Has nothing to do with the message. I just wanted to see where you were at, but evidently we don't know that, okay? But that's okay. So they're known for the terracotta soldiers, but one of the things about Xi'an, it is one of the only cities in China that still has a city wall. This wall is very tall. It's very wide. It's wide enough that one of the things you do when you go to Xi'an is you rent bicycles and you ride on top of the wall, right? And it's really wide, really deep, right? And so I've been there. I've seen it. I've seen the actual city wall. And I just imagine, what if God said, hey, we're gonna take this place, but what I want you to do is walk around these walls. I'd be like, God, let's sit down and have a talk real quick about that. Like, let's just try to figure this out, right? You want me to walk. I would have some questions, right? Because when we look at any war, no war has ever been won like that. We look at World War I, World War II, the Civil War, like all these wars in the past. No one ever said, hey, how was the war won? Well, you'll never guess it. All we did was start walking, and boom, we won the war. Like that never happens. It doesn't make sense. Doesn't make sense. What would have made more sense is they could have gone in and fought, and we know they probably weren't good fighters, but God could have used their fighting to win, right? That would even make more sense. Imagine how much courage it took to go and walk around these walls 13 times. And it's not just the walking. I can imagine the people on top of the wall were sitting there ridiculing them. They were doing out saying all kinds of things. I don't know. In my mind, I picture them like throwing trash at them or something like that. Like there's all kind of the stuff going on as they're walking around the walls. But see, sometimes it's often easier to fight than have faith. Because when we fight, we can at least say, hey, look what I did. Even if we fail, we can say, well, I gave it a valiant effort. For the city of Jericho, faith made the Israelites look foolish. Made them look foolish. Can I tell you something? Faith often makes us look foolish in the world's eyes. It often makes us look foolish in the world's eyes. Here's the one thing I love about this story. In this story, what we see is not a single person complained. They had faith in God. They had faith in what they called him to do. And in the final day, they marched around, they blew the trumpets, and they shouted. The walls fell, and they conquered Jericho. Through this, at the end, they had no choice but to look and say, this was something of God. This was something of God. I mean, what were they going to say when somebody said, well, how did y'all win? Well, you'll never guess it. We walked so fast that a big whirlwind came. Like, I don't know, what would you say? You had no choice but to say, hey, this was from God. Someone said that there's 4 types of faith. There's a faith that receives, as when we come to him empty-handed to Christ for salvation. There's faith that reckons. There's the faith that counts on God to undertake for us. There's the faith that risks, that moves out in God's power, daring to do the impossible. And there's faith that rests, the kind that in the middle of pain and suffering and rejection sits back in confidence that God will deliver. What we see here is the faith that risks. The people of Israel were willing to do everything and to risk everything because they believed in God. They did exactly what God told them to do. They didn't do anything else. They didn't add anything to it. They did exactly what he called them to do. They simply obeyed. There's all kinds of things that could have happened to them. I mean, think about it. You're walking around a city wall, not running, you're walking. What's to say they wouldn't stand up and all of a sudden just kill you while you're standing there? What's to say they wouldn't come outside the wall and kill you? They're really killing you. There's all kinds of things that could have happened, but yet they simply had faith and obeyed God in exactly what they called him to do. Do we have this kind of courage? Do we have this kind of faith? There was a missionary by the name of Robert Moffat. He was a missionary in South Africa, and he had been there for years, and he hadn't seen one single convert yet. Now, let me tell you, that's hard when you're a missionary. That's hard. You start getting discouraged. You start wondering, God, why am I even here? You start losing your support from churches. But he stood strong, and here's what happens. Some friends of him says, hey, Robert, we want to send you a gift. What can we send you? He said this. He said, if you would, send me a communion set. You know what communion is? The Lord's Supper is something that only believers partake of. Now, you can imagine the friends were kind of confused. Why does he want me to send him a communion set if there are no believers? See, Robert had faith. Now, this was a day and time where it would have took quite a while to get there. And once it got there, he received the communion set, and there were dozens of people that had already believed. See, he even though he had been there for several years and had no converts, he didn't get discouraged. He still believed, God, this is what you had for me. And God, I'm going to have faith, and I'm going to obey you in what you call me to do. What about us? What are we willing to risk in our lives to follow God? Faith isn't always easy. That's the reason it takes courage to step out on faith. Too often we proclaim that we serve a God that is big and can do anything, but yet when it comes down to it, we don't truly have faith. Here's how I know. I know this because we don't have faith to go witness to someone, to go disciple someone. Because if we did, we would see a change in our school, in our city, in our state. Too often we play the whole, God, if this is what you really want me to do, prove it, right? We say, well, God, if you want me to witness this person, I'll do it. But they have to be at Chick-fil-A on Prince Street, 6:30, right? And then when they show up at Chick-fil-A at 6:30, and you're like, okay, well, look, God, I don't know if that's really you. So if it's really you, they got an order number 4 with 4 Chick-fil-A sauces and a sweet tea, large sweet tea, right? And we start doing these things, and even when that happens, you're like, well, I don't really know, I got to go kind of thing, right? But see, here's the thing about faith. We always say faith is believing something you can't actually see, right? But it goes further than that because it requires action. Faith requires action. Hey, let me tell you something. Sometimes faith doesn't make sense. Walking around these walls did not make sense. I've talked to people that are facing decisions, and they're like, yeah, but my parents said this. Parents are unbelievers. My parents said this. This is what this person said. It doesn't make sense for me to do that. And I'm like, look, I get it, but faith doesn't always make sense. It doesn't always make sense. But I guarantee you, when you follow God, it's well worth it. The second thing we see is in verse 31. Sorry, I got to move fast. I promise I won't take as long. Verse 31, we see a girl by the name of Rahab. It says this, it says, by faith, Rahab the prostitute did not perish with those who were disobedient because she had given a friendly welcome to the spies. Rahab was a very unlikely candidate to be here in Hebrews, which is the heroes of faith, right? First of all, she was a prostitute. Second of all, she was a Gentile. The Israelites hated Gentiles. They hated Gentiles. But here's the thing I like about Rahab's story. I like it because it shows that God's grace and mercy is open to all who receive it. See, Rahab lived in the land of Canaan, which was full of people who were unbelieving and disobedient. They would have heard about what happened at Jericho, and they'd be like, nah, I still don't believe it. Like, I still don't believe in God. These were terrible, terrible people. They were known for their immoral and perverted sexual practices as well as their general cruelty. Here's the thing they would do. Often they would take living babies and they would put them in jars and they would put them in walls as a foundation sacrifice. These were evil people. They were begging for judgment. Rahab was a Canaanite. She was a very unlikely candidate. Israel sent some spies in. When they sent some spies in, they came upon Rahab. And it says that Rahab welcomed them and she believed. Here's what she said. She said, the Lord your God, he is God in the heavens above and on the earth beneath. She took a risk in believing. She took a risk in believing in God. This could have led to all kinds of things. If the people of Canaan would have found out, they would have killed her immediately. But she took a risk and believed in God. God didn't look at her past and say, well, you know what, you're a Canaanite and you're a prostitute, so therefore I can't use you. No, he said, hey, if you're willing, I want to use you. Now, here's the cool thing about Rahab. You ready? Rahab would become the mother of Boaz, who was married to Ruth, who was the great-great-grandmother of David, and by that, she would become an ancestor of Jesus. All of that because she had faith. God doesn't care about your past. He wants to know if you're willing. I was talking to a student not too long ago. He said, Ryan, I have this sin in my life. It's something that's worse than any other sin that anybody else does. Like, it's just terrible. It's terrible. And here's the thing, Ryan, like I really feel like God's called me to do ministry, but I can't do it until I overcome this sin. I can't do it until this is out of my life. I was like, I get it. I do. Let me tell you something. You'll never truly overcome sin. There will always be temptations. Instead, why don't you use that? Why don't you use that sanctification process, the process where you're trying to get better, and all those kind of things, to try to help those that are going through similar situations like you are. God doesn't care about our past. He just wants us to be willing. And here's what the end of this chapter says. We're going to skip some verses. The end of this chapter says, all of these things, though commended through their faith, did not receive what was promised, since God had provided something better for them, for us, that apart from us, they should not be made perfect. True faith has the courage to count on salvation. The people that we see here, the Israelites, Rahab, and anybody else in chapter 11, they didn't do it for self-gratification. They didn't do it for themselves. They did it to glorify God. And so here's the thing, when we read Jeremiah 29:11, he has plans for us, a hope, future, all these things. We're going to truly believe it. We have to have faith in what God's called us to do. And God's called all of us to do something. If you're hearing a Christian, he's not saying, you're exempt. No, he's calling all of us to do something. Are you willing to step on faith and do what he's called you to do? Is it hard? Yes. Does it make sense all the time? No. Does it matter your past? No. All he wants is for you to be willing to step out on faith and follow him. And here's the thing, I guarantee you, great things happen when you have faith in God. Great things happen when you have faith in God. Let's pray together. God, we thank you for who you are. We thank you for the great, amazing, and mighty God that you are. We thank you most of all that you sent your son down to earth to die on the cross for our sins so that we can spend eternity in heaven with you. And God, I pray that we would never take that for granted, to always realize how blessed we are to call you ours, that you have desire to have a relationship with us. And God, I pray today that we would step out on faith and that we would truly follow you, that we would understand that you do have a plan for us, that you do care for us. And God, I pray that we just may step out on faith and do whatever it takes, to risk whatever it takes, to be willing to follow you and you alone. God, I pray that you would help us as we go throughout the day, throughout the week, that everything we would do would give you glory. In Christ's name I pray. Amen.